voiceover or not.
Play ball.
At this point, you've already had some instruction in construction types and the different elements and different types of garages. Again, we're in a precast garage, and I'm going to point out defects, damage or defects that occur in precast structures, and some of them are unique to precast structures, some of them are common to all structures. And we'll just walk around and I'll point some of those out so you get to learn to visualize these things in the field, and you know what good looks like and what bad looks like. So I'm standing on a field poured wash over top of a girder line or a pour strip, and there are several things going on here. So in the instructional video about construction types, we talked about different types of joints, and in this case we have tool joints that are positioned over top of the precast joints, and you can see several things here. You can see that the joint sealant has pulled away from the edge. That's an adhesion failure, so it's no longer adhering to the sides. And you can see the chalkiness on my finger, and that is caused by ultraviolet light. And whenever you feel that or see that, that means the sealants have dried out because of the ultraviolet light, the sunlight. And you'll see this on the roof level particularly. And that makes the joint sealants brittle and shrink, and they pull away from the edges. So this no longer provides waterproofing protection. If we go over here, you'll see some random cracks that are in this wash that looks, they were repaired at one point, but again, the joint sealants failed, and so now water gets in there, and in the wintertime, because we're in the Northeast, it freezes and it continues to widen the crack as it continues to spall. So this is a problem. Water will penetrate here, get underneath this pour strip, and cause other damage. You can see a random crack here that's fairly old, right here. And cracks are caused by a lot of different things. Sometimes premature drying of the concrete while it's curing. Sometimes it's caused by stress or flexing. Here again is a tool joint along this edge where the precast pocket basically is here, and this is the precast full thickness, and this is failed now. So this is no longer providing its service. We have line striping or wayfinding, and you can see that this is faded and chipping away, and so again, that's no longer as visible as it used to be. And as we walk along, you're going to see orange stripes, basically rust stripes here, and it may not be obvious to you, but that is caused by the plowing operation. The plows typically have little balls that the plow blade rides on, and that's a metal blade, or it's often a metal blade, but sometimes that blade is protected, which we would ask it to be. We ask them to do that, but those balls run along the deck, causing streaking like this, and they can also cause damage in the joints as they drop down into the joints. This is a double T joint, and you can see again we have adhesion failures here, right here. So you can see where that sealant is pulling up all along that edge, and adhesion failures. And in this case, we don't have a lot of oxidation or from the ultraviolet light. This material is still pretty flexible. So when you see this kind of failure, there's often several root causes, but in this case, it may be that there's a connection failure here, that the double T's are now flexing up and down independent of each other, and that basically shears off the caulk at the edge. It could be a symptom of that. We don't know right now. It also could be a workmanship issue. When they go to put the sealants in, they'll use a primer and they clean up the edges to make sure there's a good strong bond, and if they don't do that, the adhesion won't last. Now we're going to walk down the deck, and let's go over here. And as I mentioned in the training videos for construction types, precast elements are put together with connections frequently buried in the concrete or under joint sealant. In this case, there's a pocket here, and this is an indication that there's a connection between this ramp wall and this column, and you can see there's a lot of cracking that radiates off of this, and that cracking is caused by a lot of stress as the structure flexes, particularly with when it heats up in the summertime and gets cool at night. There's a lot of flexing, and it's causing a lot of stress here. So we worry about these kinds of things because of moisture exposure, particularly on the roof level. The other thing you can see is the joint sealants. You can see a lot of alligator cracking, and that's a symptom of that the joint sealants are reaching the end of their service life. Over here, you can see previous repairs. These are actually supplemental connections because the underlying connections failed. And this is a remedial that was put in place some time ago. And as I discussed up there, where you had joint sealant failure at a T-to-T joint, could be caused by either overloading or failed connections. We know now that there's evidence of failed connections because in this case they had to repair them. We go down onto the ramp we're walking down. You'll see again there is a large area of field poured concrete in a pocket in the double T's. This happens to be over a wall, a shear wall down below, and we can see this downstairs. And there's a lot of random cracking around this area, and that the joint sealants have failed, and now water has gotten in there and expanded and contracted and blown away that material. Over here we have something called cohesion failure in a joint sealant, and in this case this joint sealant you can see is very thin, and it's almost too thin for the width of the joint, right? And so there are specifications that indicate how thick the joint sealant needs to be based on its width. In this case, I'm guessing they violated that, but what's happening here is you can see all the alligator cracks and the fact that this is very chalky. This is really worn out now from the sunlight, and as it shrinks, it pulls apart and it doesn't have any resistance because it's so thin, so it's failed. That's a cohesion as opposed to an adhesion failure. You'll see a lot of fine cracking. Well, like they have these fine cracks in this light wall, basically. These are just fine shrinkage cracks. They're not structural. They're almost invisible, except that you see these darker patches. But again, it's not a structural issue. It's just reflective cracking from where the surface dried out more quickly than the underlying condition and during the curing process. You'll see here a random crack in the pour strip. And again, we worry about those things, particularly on the roof level, because this is the umbrella of the structure, and this is where water can penetrate the most. Again, here we have adhesion failures, but actually total failures, where the joint sealant is pulled apart, and in many cases is even missing. As you walk along, you're going to see lots of different conditions that are notable, and you have to learn to observe them. In this case, you see the basically a chipped edge of the double T here, and now there's an opening here where water can get through. My guess is that this is probably caused by one of the balls on the plow. As it rides along the surface, and you can see some rust staining there, comes down and drops into the joint and it pops out again, or vice versa going uphill. And that indication is that something hard hit that, and it obviously wouldn't have been a car tire. So it looks to me like something was dragging across this, probably an unprotected ball. We like to have plow blades on wheels whenever possible. As we walk to the underside, you'll notice the floor drain here, and you can see a lot of debris has accumulated. Sand and some small stones have accumulated here, and eventually they're going to work their way over to that drain, and this becomes a problem because it can clog that drain eventually. Now, some of the drains, particularly at the roof level, actually have a basket underneath. They can fill with debris, allowing water to overflow to below, but those baskets need maintenance. But anyway, this is a problem. This is an indication of not necessarily poor housekeeping, but a lack of consistent housekeeping. We'll see here large cracks in the double T. You can see the darkness, and cracks tend to absorb water and stay wet for a while, and so you'll see them more visibly, and you can see some cracks there. It's tough to say exactly what caused these. This T is twisted, so you can see it's slanted where the black car is. It slopes down there, and sometimes that causes it's called a torsional crack, where the double T gets twisted, causing some diagonal cracks. It could be that these started that way, particularly this series of cracks right here. This is a very typical torsion crack. I'm not 100% sure what's causing this one. Not necessarily structural at this point, but something we would monitor. And this is a punch-through stair that we looked at before. This is a steel bollard to kind of keep cars away from the pedestrian area. What they do is they put this plate down and they grout underneath to keep water deflected, but you can see the grout is pulled apart and it's no longer serving its purpose. So this should be re-grouted and probably even have some waterproofing around it, some joint sealant.